Welcome to our MOOC aLIFEca. During this section of the MOOC, we will explore and we will introduce you the notion of sustainability and LCA, life cycle assessment. In particular, we will try to frame what sustainability is and what sustainable development is. So let's start with the notion of sustainable development. We all know that the word sustainability is one of the most used words of our times, and this concept has progressively gained a huge global attention in the 21st century. But we know also that the discourse around sustainability brings us back to the late 20th century, together with the definition of sustainable development. Indeed, on March 20, 1987, the Brundtland Report, also known as Our Common Future, was released by the World Commission on Environment and Development. The name was given by the coordinator Gro Harlem Brundtland, who had in that year and was the president of the World Commission on Environment and Development. Such document that we are mentioning frames for the first time the concept of sustainable development. And you can see in this slide that sustainable development is defined as the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So let's try to frame from the notion of sustainable development what is sustainability. From a very general point of view, sustainability is being capable of being maintained in existence without interruption or diminution. So sustainability, as you can see here in this slide, is conceived as being a very general term, a commitment to meeting the basic needs of all, and extending to all the opportunity to satisfy their aspiration for a better life. So, as you can see, there is not the sole environmental dimension, but there is also an ethical principle that also encompasses the environment. We can say indeed that to the simple definition of sustainability and sustainable development, there are several dimensions that can be taken into consideration. We can say in the end that sustainability is an inherently complex phenomenon. Indeed, it is important to underline that sustainability is the most important issue that man shall address. It is a complex phenomenon. It is described, as we have seen before, by several different parameters and indicators. Most importantly, sustainability is science-based, and therefore it can be measured. It has nothing to do with marketing tools or communication, and it is not well understood by the majority of consumers. Another important thing is that sustainability shall be inherent to the system or the activity. It cannot be added afterwards. So, as we have said that sustainability is composed of different dimensions, and different dimensions shall be analyzed when we talk about sustainability, let's try to frame an holistic approach to sustainability, trying to encompass also the environmental, the economic and societal dimension. As you can see here in the slides, from 1987 to the present days, several commitments have been adopted by the international community in order to set environmental standards, to set guidelines, but also goals to pursue sustainability. One of the most recent and known is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, as you can see the images here in the slides, that were adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2015. The vision here is leaving no one behind. And therefore, the agenda, the 2030 Agenda, represents a global development strategy able to tackle action on people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. So the 2030 Agenda stresses even strongly the need for an integration of the different spheres of sustainability, of the different dimensions of sustainability. Basically, it is not possible to achieve a particular level of environmental, social, or economic sustainability without considering at least a basic level or of all three dimensions simultaneously. In other words, as we have anticipated, an holistic vision of sustainable development. And this is clearly stated in the 2030 Agenda. So, since it is not possible to, as I said, to achieve a particular level of environmental, social, or economic sustainability without considering a basic level of all three forms simultaneously, we can take into account a parameter for a more holistic thinking of these three dimensions. And this is the ISO 26000, called the Guidance on Social Responsibility. Such ISO aims at assisting organizations, regardless size and location, in contributing to sustainable development. Although is based on the concept of social responsibility, such guideline is increasingly viewed as a way of assessing an organization's commitment to sustainability and its overall performance, since it entails core subjects and sub-requirements, as we see in this figure. So we have the organizational governance, and we see different spheres of action, such as human rights, labor practices, environment, fair operating practices, consumer issues, but also community involvement and development. But let's first of all start with the economic dimension of sustainability. You can see here in this slide that we mention the gross domestic product, the GDP. So what's the GDP? Is the measure of the size and health of a country's economy. And this is, of course, determined by the GDP. It is basically the monetary value of the final goods and services that are produced within a country over a certain period of time, which is usually a year. Basically, the GDP gives an economic snapshot of a country and is used to estimate the size of an economy and the growth rate. An important thing is that the GDP considers all transactions as positive, so that part of it also damages caused by pollution, natural disasters, etc. For example, if you buy a car, the GDP grows. If you have an accident, the GDP grows as well. So in this way, GDP does not make distinctions among the activities that include well-being and those that may hamper it. So this must be taken into account. There are, of course, some alternatives to the GDP. As you can see here in the slides, we have the Genuine Progress Indicator, the GPI, which is a national level measure of economic growth and prosperity. It measures the increase in the quality of life by distinguishes positive expenses and negative ones. Another one is the green gross domestic product, which is called the GDP Green. It is an index of economic growth that takes into account also the environmental consequences of this growth. So the green GDP monetizes, for example, biodiversity loss and accounts for the costs that are caused by climate change. So we can see here with the Genuine Progress Indicator and with the green GDP that the environmental dimension is also incorporated into the economic dimension. Let's move to the next one, which is the social dimension. The social dimension of sustainability takes into account the values that promote fairness and respect for individual rights, with a balance between the needs of the individuals and the needs of the group. In addition to the more traditional themes of social sustainability, which can be poverty and employment, the community has also included new ones. For example, social equity, diversity, social quality of life, and integrated governance, including, for example, CSR, corporate social responsibility, and hybrid business models. Although CSR may be a more familiar term, the view that social responsibility is applicable to all organizations has recently emerged, as different types of entities recognize that they too had responsibility for contributing to sustainable development and sustainability. This involves, of course, welfare, quality of life, and sustainable human development, and includes human health and protection, but also environmental justice, access to education, and equal opportunities. Finally, we move to the environmental dimension. So environment is the third pillar, but of course it is the primary concern of the future of humanity. Both the economy and the society that we have explored before are constrained by the limits of the Earth ecosystems. This means, and as we mentioned before, that the environmental issue have a preponderant role, for example, in the 2030 Agenda, and most of the SDGs targets include specific references to the link of the environment. The most urgent issues to be tackled within the environmental dimension are, of course, climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution, especially plastic pollution. And human impacts on the atmospheres, land and water resources, working towards the ability to use natural resources without undermining the equilibrium and the integrity of ecosystems. So we can say that environment has therefore a direct impact on the economic and social aspects of sustainable development. So to conclude, we have to stress that the need for our holistic thinking that underlines the interconnectedness between the three dimensions is even more crucial. Let's now move to LCA, life cycle assessment. I will introduce you LCA as a methodology for environmental impact assessment, and I will give you some theoretical framework. So let's start with some definitions according to ISO 14001. Here you can see that we have the definitions of environment, environmental aspect, and environmental impact. First of all, environment is defined as the surroundings in which the organization operates and includes, for example, air, water, land, fauna, flora, natural resources, humans, and all their interrelationships. Then there is environmental aspect, which is an element of an organization's activities or also products or services that may interact with the environment. So here we can see already the interaction between the environment and all the aspects of the environment. Then we have the environmental impact. The environmental impact is basically both, it's an adverse or beneficial change to the environment that results from the organization's environmental aspect. So we can see here the interconnectedness between the aspect and the impact. The results of environmental aspect is an environmental impact, and it can be adverse or beneficial. Here you can see some examples of environmental aspects and impacts that we mentioned before. So, for example, we have emissions of carbon dioxide, and the impact can be climate change, for example, via global warming, or also oil consumption of vehicles, and that brings to the depletion of natural resources. Then we have discharges to water that may result in water contamination, but also air emissions that may result to air contamination. So let's now focus on the definition of life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment is a methodology that is used to identify, to characterize and to assess the environmental impacts that we mentioned before across a product's entire life cycle. This means from the extraction of raw materials, which is called cradle, to the final disposal of this material, which is called grave. You can see here in this circle that LCA is composed, or better, a product life cycle consists of 5 main phases. The raw material extraction, the manufacturing and processing, for example, including assembly and storage. Then we have the transportation and the distribution. Then we have the usage and retail. And finally, we have the end of life, which in this case includes recycling. Also, the main types of impacts that we have mentioned before are generally those associated with inputs and outputs. Examples of inputs may include, but of course not limited to, as you can see here in the left side of these slides, raw materials, water, thermal energy, electric energy, chemicals, but also transports. And examples of outputs, as you can see here in the right side of the screen, we have finished products, for example, leather, co-products, but also wastewater emissions to water and emissions to water, recycled waste, but also disposed waste. Let's move now to the main phases of LCA. LCA is subject of international standards, such as these two ISO that you can see here in the slides, and they define 4 main steps of LCA. First, goal and scope. Second, the life cycle inventory. Third, the life cycle impact assessment. And fourth, the interpretation. We will explore these phases later in our presentation. To end our discussion and the theoretical framework around LCA, let's now describe some benefits of using LCA. So why LCA is beneficial for companies who want to use the LCA technique. There are many benefits in using LCA for the measurement of environmental impacts. LCA, as we said, covers the entire product life cycle, starting from raw material extraction and acquisition, through production of energy and materials, through manufacturing and operation, to end of life. When considering LCA applied to the automotive industry, we see that it offers one of the most comprehensive tools to assess the transformation of the automotive industry and its transition from conventional fossil fuels, such as diesel and petrol, to alternative ones, such as, for example, electricity or hydrogen. It allows incorporating life cycle thinking into the decision making in order to achieve a sustainable and circular alternative. So LCA brings a lot of benefits to companies who want to adopt it for the benefit both of their organization but also with a sustainable view in measuring environmental impacts.